Hi, and welcome to my new series called Behind the Scenes, where I'm sharing a creative project, the concept behind it, and the tools I use to execute it. Today, I'm going to be talking about a personal project called Ants in My Pens, which I developed last year in preparation to a new course called Script Alphabets, Grow, Branch Out, and Flourish. I taught this course at Tipo-g, Typographic School of Barcelona, and I wanted to study roundhand variations. So what I'm going to show you first is my table and the starting process, which is pencil and paper, and then the second half of the project, which is vectorization using glyphs. So let's go. I'm gonna be sharing my table now. Okay. So this is the first step that I started with. So in this first step, I'm starting with pencil and a pointed flexible steel nib, in this case called Hand 101. I use both of them because I know I'm going to be studying English roundhand variations. So I want to be mindful of the contrast that the nib is giving me to begin with. And then the main part of this process is going to be understanding each pair of letters, the letters and words I'm working with, and which combinations of letters I have, and where I have opportunities to create extensions or swashes to create an ornamented piece, and how can I infuse variations within the ornamentation. So the first part is starting with lowercase and only a capitalized A. And I reproduce the same with the nib just to have a feeling of the contrast I'm gonna be dealing with. If I go in, you can see. And then I go to capitalizing each word and starting to infuse some ornamentation and starting to think, where do I have opportunities to extend capitals, crossbars, maybe descenders? Where can I create ligatures, and where are the good opportunities for me for creating a very custom piece? So this is the first step. And then I start introducing ornamentation. So in here, I would like to describe the piece and what's going on in each instance. So let's go for capital A. So you can see that capital A has a left leg with a round oval following the 55 degrees, which is the angle of the current writing, and a second 55-degree oval in here. I have two intersections, and then the right leg has a figure of 8 or infinite sort of shape and is crossing again and creating the crossbar of this letter. Now I have a lowercase n with an extension in its exits and a very elongated crossbar of my T, which is also looking for this oval shape. The oval shape is more or less sitting horizontally, same as this oval shape. So we have two main angles for the ovals. One is the angle of the writing, and the second one is horizontal, same as its baseline. Now we go into a capital I with a very long extension in here that I'm wondering if this is getting too busy because there is a lot of crossings in this section. We have an extension of the exit of the lowercase n, and now we have a very large left leg of this M that crosses capital I, and we have a right leg of capital M that creates a ligature with the lowercase y. Now we have capital P, and you can see the main part of the P is its column, is a spinal column or capital stem that we have created a ligature with the bar of the T. And at the same time, in here again, we see an horizontal oval, another horizontal oval with this figure of 8 of this, an extension of lowercase a, second, two double ovals for capital P, and an elongated letter S bouncing down the baseline to finish. Up to here, most of the piece works except this area in here, which is getting really busy. And I think that later on, I know that later on, I'm going to be adding weight. And I know that once I add weight in here, there is too much going on. So I decided that I'm going to simplify this section of the piece. So as you can see in here, I have the second step. You can see how I'm making marks and I'm saying to myself, there is no contrast, obviously, it's only a monoline sketch, and the X height is 17 millimeters. Most of the piece is the same, except this section, which I have cleared, and there is more air coming in here. So now I have a lowercase I that coming from the top of the eye, I have, again, a sort of figure of 8 version. So as I mentioned, we have 2 angles for these ovals, for these extensions or ornamentations. One is the 55-degree oval, and the other is the same as the baseline, the horizontal oval. From here, I want to see what happens when I turn this thin stroke into a thicker stroke. And at the same time, I want to see what happens if I break the ductus. And by breaking the ductus, I'm talking about movements that originally are continuous, like this N, has now been broken into 2 independent strokes. So we have the entrance of the N, a stop, and starting up here, the second stroke of the N. The rest of the piece is very similar to what you saw earlier, with the differences in here that I stop this extension of the left leg of the M, and there is no intersection anymore because I'm thinking that things can start to get really busy. I already have an intersection here and another here, and I think maybe it's gonna get too much, so I stop in there for the moment to then look at the piece. See how the A is separated, the ball or the oval of the A is separated from the stem, and the connection from the T to the S is done in 2 separate strokes. So most of the letter forms, including letter Y, have been broken down in from the continuous ductus. Now, next step. So the next step is adding contrast. So in here, what you can see is that I'm using sort of basically the same layout that I used as a step 1, keeping in mind that I'm not going to use capital I, but I'm going to this step, which I'm still using the same X height that I have in here, 17 millimeters. And now I'm creating contrast and I'm deciding on the endings. So I decided to create a medium contrast. So I know the contrast because I have the shapes in here that I previously did with the ink and the pen. And now I'm starting to think that all my endings, I want them to be a teardrop shape. This is inspired by the early Italic calligraphy from Cancelleresca, where you can see this type of blobs in a lot of the ascenders. And I'm using this type of teardrop endings to finalize all these swashes and flourishes that are appearing in here. So now the piece has a refined look and feel. There is very thin movements and much thicker movements. I have to be mindful of the crossings. So what type of crossing do I have? And I want to avoid at all costs to have crossings that are 2 strokes that are thick. So I'm going to look for cross sections where either the horizontal and the vertical are both thin, or either one is thick and the other is thin. But I'm going to avoid at all costs, if possible, try to have 2 thick strokes crossing, because I'm going to create a very dark spot. Okay, from this one, I want to keep adding variations and keep modifying the contrast. So in here, you can see that I'm using my sketch number 2 just to have a feeling. I have at the top the original sketch, and then I am looking at the original sketch and thinking, how can I turn this into a high contrast? Let's go up again. Okay, so what is the thinking process behind it? So the thinking process now is, I still want to have thicker endings, but this time I want to make sure I have flat flags. This, you could call this bell-bottom flags as well, but let's go with flat endings. And so the contrast has increased because now the thick strokes, which are the strokes going down, are doubled the amount than before. This is before. If we look at capital M, and now we look at capital M, you can see how the width of the downstroke now has been increased at least by 2 or even by 3. Now, I want to convert the endings all being flat, and I want to make sure that now maybe I also need to simplify some aspects because it might get too busy. In here, it's getting busy because, of course, I have a lot of cross sections. So there is 1, 2, and 3. So this can get very busy. Still, overall is working. I know I have to work on a spacing, of course, because once we add more weight, the length of the quote is going to get longer. So between capital P and lowercase a, I know I have to introduce more space. So far, the rest can work fine. The intersections are more or less working. There is no thick and thicks. In here, there is a question mark because there is like, oof, this must be too much going on. Okay, number 5. Now, number 6. I decided to refine the piece and add a new variation. So what you can see in here is not that different what we saw earlier, but what is the big difference is, the big difference is now I'm deciding that the ends of all my extensions are pointed. So instead of having a flat flag ending, now I'm going to finish every ornamented section with a pointed movement. In here, you can see how I have already fixed the spacing between capital P and lowercase a, and I have the opportunity to refine a bit more the shapes because I'm drawing the variation for the second time. So again, if we look at the first variation, it's not so different, but all the extensions are ending with a flat flag. Here, all the variations are now ending pointed, which makes the lettering slightly lighter. Still, the contrast is really high, and still I need to make sure that I don't have crossings with too thick strokes, otherwise it's gonna get too dark, too thick. Okay, variation number 7. So this is something I haven't worked on much, and I really wanted to explore, which is turning the lettering into something really, really thick, and also adding a lot of weight. If we think about the 60s and the fashion of the 60s, you might think of a lot of bell-bottom pants, which in Spanish is called pantalones de campana, which is something that was very prominent on that era, and it has its comeback for sure in the future. And this bell-bottom pants is translated into the lettering. Because the sentences ends in my pants, I thought is a very good connection with the bell-bottom pants itself. So I wanted to try a variation where there is a lot of space and a lot of weight at the bottom of the lettering. This is something I haven't hardly worked on, and it was new for me. So it was a very interesting way to analyze how can I turn something, which you can see here, much more ornamented, into something that obviously now, if we put it next to each other, needs to be a lot more simplified, because once the strokes are much thicker, I have to avoid all these type of connections because I'm not working anymore. I have to go to a simplification. And how can I work with areas that are really thick at the bottom of the lettering? Okay, up to here, this is the end of the pencil and paper stage. So the last one is the one that I feel that is further away from the final step, but the other steps are quite close, and I can use these sketches now as the base for my lettering. Now, let's go into the computer now and have a look at the vectorization. So I'm gonna stop on my desk. And now I'm going to share with you my computer and see what can we see on the other side. So in here, I'm going to start sharing one of the sketches, which is probably the simple one. So what you are seeing at the moment in here is glyphs. And with glyphs, I start vectorizing. So I have introduced the sketch, my own sketch, and I have gone over it trying to clean up. This is what the monoline, very, very thin monoline looks like. And this is the X-ray of the vectorization with some of the anchor points. So this takes a while if you are not familiarized with vectorization and if you're not familiarized with this type of lettering, but it is a very handy exercise because it's actually teaching you how to see very clear. As the more you draw in vector forms curves, the more you start seeing the curves. Now I'm going to show you a second stage. So let's go back again and I'll share a high contrast step. Okay. So in here, you can see how I introduce and place the pencil sketch. And on this section in here, it's what I call the X-ray with all the anchor points. If I go to the final step, this is what it looks like. And of course, there are a lot of things to work on. This is not the final, but this is one of the vectorization steps. Again, is a lot of thin and thick movements. There is high contrast. You see how this version is the version that I am ending all the extensions with a very pointed shape and the process. Excellent. Now, I'm going to be sharing with you another process. So in here, you're going to see on my side how the Italian flavored version looks like. So this is the version that I created where all the endings are rounded. And it's going to be, or it is, a much lower contrast. So the thicks are not so thick anymore. And still is very, I find this version to be very elegant and very interesting because even the bottom of the letter N, if we go in, it's completely rounded in here. So rounded at the bottom, rounded at the top, and also rounding the terminals. So I find it to be a very interesting shape. So let's go back. And now I want to show you the whole set. So in here, I started, as I showed you on glyphs, with the monoline. It's a very thin line. Let's go in a little bit more so we can see it with more detail. It's a very thin line with pretty much following the pencil sketch I showed you. I created this piece by doing a couple of things. Number one, I converted to outlines these strokes. And once I converted this line to outlines, I offset the path, making the path much thicker. Once I did that, I manually broken down the continuous ductus, creating independent strokes. And here you have the outline and this continuous monoline version. Number three, we have the high contrast with flat terminals. So I'm very mindful in here of what happens when all the terminals are completely flat. Let's go back up a little bit more. Yeah. And then what happens, this applied to the baseline of the ends, the terminals, the top of the S, the top of the T, and everything is working together. Okay. High contrast with flat terminals, then medium contrast with teardrop terminals, which is what you just saw before in black and white. And now we have also the high contrast with pointed terminals. So again, you saw this sketch on glyphs, and this is the final sketch. I have worked on the spacing. I have made sure in here that things are not getting too busy, which is almost at the limit to me of busyness. And it's working. There is a lot of ligatures or connections, capital M, the P to the T. Excellent. Last one, extra black, bottom heavy or bell bottom. Okay, this is the last pencil version I showed you. It took me quite a long time to figure this out because the pencil sketch I had was good as a starting point, but it wasn't so good to give me a clear direction. So I had to sketch and sketch again this version on the computer to make sense of the DNA of the lettering. This could easily be translated into a font because there is no a lot of personalization except this ligature maybe between the T and the S, but this is easily done with font design. So this is the closest exercise to actually designing a script font and trying to understand the DNA of the entire alphabet system and making the thick strokes and the bell bottoms regular across the whole path. So with that, that's the end of sharing the creative process of this piece. I hope this was very helpful, and thank you very much, and I'll see you again in another video.